Democrat leader Nick Clegg is warning this morning that Theresa May's intention to take the UK out of the single market will damage those she claims to want to help the most.
He will argue in a speech later on that the result of the EU referendum is already making families worse off. And he joins us now from Westminster. Morning to you. Thanks very much for joining us here on BBC Breakfast. Now, the Remain campaign made some very dire financial predictions about what might happen post-Brexit. You're putting a cost on it, but that doesn't really reflect what was said in the campaign, does it?
I think you've got to distinguish, don't you, between some of the kind of breathless claims about what would happen immediately after the referendum and the long-term effects on the British economy and the long-term effects on people's, on the money in their pockets. And we've already seen prices go up in the shops. Food is more expensive, petrol, energy, holidays, because the pound has absolutely plummeted compared to the summer of last year by about 17%. And also, we're starting to see some announcements from some companies, Nestle, Deutsche Bank, saying they're going to move people out of this country. And we've just seen, I'm afraid, the latest sort of figures showing that people aren't spending in the shops as they were a few months ago because there's a real squeeze on their incomes. And my worry is that in the same way that the Conservatives, I think, are being rather complacent about the election, treating it in effect like a coronation rather than an election, they're also being rather complacent about the effects that are already emerging about Brexit. And here's the point, and which will be made tremendously much worse by the choice to pursue a particularly hard Brexit. And I believe, of course, that's not the right choice made by Theresa May. I also believe that's the reason she should be held to account by an effective opposition in Parliament.
You'll be very aware that Theresa May, they're saying, the Conservatives, aren't they, saying every vote for Theresa May gives her a better hand in Brexit negotiations, helping to get a deal which strengthens the economy and helps UK consumers. They talk, don't they, about strong and stable leadership going into these negotiations, holding a strong position.
Yeah, the problem is, of course, it's not true. There's no evidence at all that just, racking up a great big landslide majority for the Conservatives is going to make this negotiation any more straightforward. In fact, I think by doubling up and by recommitting herself, as she is in this election campaign, to the very hard, uncompromising approach to Brexit, in other words, not just pulling us out of the EU's political institutions, but also out of Margaret Thatcher's single market and out of the customs union and so on, she's making a difficult situation economically even worse for many millions of hard-pressed families in this country. And she's also, of course, in a sense, making it much more likely, as we saw in the reports of that dinner with Jean-Claude Juncker, that the atmosphere is going to become increasingly belligerent between the United Kingdom and the rest of the EU. And again, no one is going to benefit from that, because we depend so heavily for our own prosperity, for our jobs, for the money in our pockets, for our trade, on a good relationship with the rest of the EU.
Right, so you're making it quite clear. Just let's talk very specifically, would you, if you would, about the single market, because Europe is being quite clear about that. Being part of the single market, staying in that, means that there must be freedom of movement. Would you agree to that then?
So my own view is that Theresa May could have and should have sought to find a solution on the issue of freedom of movement, which is undoubtedly a big issue, if she had wanted to in the aftermath of the referendum. And my own view, having spoken to many European politicians, is they would have tried to find some way to accommodate her demands. I think where there is a bit more of a rock and a hard place is that it is impossible to be part of this single market, which is after all, a single market of rules, replacing 28 bits of red tape with one sort of rule book for the whole of the EU. It's impossible to be part of that open marketplace of rules if you're not going to abide by the rulings of it. In other words, abide by the European Court of Justice.
So you'd agree
I think she could have found a solution on freedom of movement, but by saying she's simply going to ignore the rulings of the single market, I think she will make us poorer as a country.
Yes, and I asked your opinion. Would you agree to freedom of movement?
So look, I think freedom of movement benefits Brits going, studying, travelling, working abroad, and I think it benefits us as a country as well. My point, however, is if you want to find a solution to freedom of movement, so, I don't know, for instance, restricting it more to the freedom to work rather than simply to move across the European Union, that is something which I suspect she could have achieved if she had wanted to. She chose not to. She chose simply to declare, without speaking to the rest of the EU, that she was going to pursue the most hard and uncompromising form of Brexit. And that will make the difficult economic situation in the future even harder. That is, of course, the reason She's holding a general election because she knows that the news is going to be tough in the months and years to come, so she's getting her excuses and her election in early.
Mr Clegg, could I ask you this as well? I mean, you've been part of a coalition government, so you of all people are qualified to know what it's like in a coalition government. Would the Liberal Democrats be part of a coalition government again? Are you talking to other parties?
No, not in this election, not at all. There's no remote chance that the Liberal Democrats are going to be in a coalition either with Theresa May in number 10 or Jeremy Corbyn in number 10. It's not going to happen, which is, by the way, why this endless robotic stuff from the Conservatives about saying, oh, you know, it's either us or a coalition of chaos is complete nonsense. No one believes that Jeremy Corbyn is going to be Prime Minister of this country. Everyone assumes that Theresa May will be Prime Minister. So the question is, who is going to hold her to account? Who's going to hold her and her ministers to account when their promises of this utopian Brexit turn out to be something much, much more difficult for millions of people across the country that can only come from a more effective opposition, which I believe only the Liberal Democrats can provide?
Nick Clegg from the Liberal Democrats, thanks for your time this morning. Thank you.